There's no way that something huge like the murder of George Floyd cannot lead to something positive, because human beings don't allow that. It's just not possible. And that probably comes from being in the theater, where almost 100% of all work that's generated is coming from somebody taking some experience in their life and turning it into something beautiful, or hopefully beautiful.
Hi, I'm Eric Ostro. Welcome to Season 2 of Live at the Lortel. We created this podcast to invite artists working off-Broadway to share their current projects. As we start Season 2, theater is still on pause. But while our stages are silent, the theater is undergoing a reckoning of twin pandemics, the COVID-19 virus and the virus of systemic racism. This season, we're sharing this platform with different co-hosts from the BIPOC community as we roll up our sleeves to talk to artists about creating art during COVID, as well as systemic racism in our community and country. We hope these conversations will help motivate and begin to heal as we discuss these painful issues. Today, my co-host is the recipient for the 2020 Lucille Lortel for Outstanding Featured Actor in a Musical, my friend John Andrew Morrison, for his performance in the Pulitzer Prize-winning stage musical, A Strange Loop. John Andrew, it is such a pleasure to have you. You were top of my list when we were thinking about people to have as co-hosts. Thank you for joining us this afternoon with our Season 2, Episode 1 with the incredible BD Wong.
I could not be happier to be here with you and to chat with BD Wong. He's been an icon, someone that I've wanted to chat with for a long time, and thrilled to be here in Kingston, Jamaica on Zoom, talking with the both of you.
The weather must be nice.
It is. It's nicer than August, that's for sure. It's cool enough.
So I actually met BD almost, I hate to say it, like 28 years ago at Actors Theater of Louisville, where I was an apprentice, and he came down for the Humana Festival to work on a David Henry Hwang play called Bondage. And he was so kind and so nice and took some of us under his wing and taught us a lot during that time. His kindness and humanity stands out in my mind and always will. So I'm so excited to see him again 28 years later. Even though he looks exactly the same, he definitely will not recognize me. 28 years later, I definitely do not look the same.
Well, 28 years ago, you were what, 2 years old?
I was six. Thanks for the 2, but I was definitely 6.
Got it.
Today, we are so excited. This is our first episode of the second season, and we really wanted to do it with a big bang. And in my opinion, we have one of our greatest actors of our generation, Mr. BD Wong. So thank you and welcome to Live at the Lortel.
Thank you. That's very, very nice. My goodness. Thank you. And hello, John.
Hello, BD. It's so nice to see you and nice get to chat with you. I'm so excited about that.
Thanks. Me too.
Yeah, we were able to get this connection. There's a reason sometimes you have a co-host. They have other relationships with other artists, and you were the first on John's list too. So I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you.
Yes.
So first question, how are you? What's going on not that there's anything going on in the country right now, but how has the past 6 months been for you, and what have you done?
It has been very interesting for me. I have plenty of things to complain about, but in the relative terms to other people, I feel like I have been spared a lot of discomfort, and I'm grateful for that. My main complaint in the very first part of the whole quarantine period that started in March was that I was bored. And that is one thing that I criticize people all the time for saying that there's no reason to be living life and be bored. And so I did get very creative during this period of time, and I was generating creative projects in my own house that really, to be really honest, got me through a period of time, not just in the boredom, but kind of the anxiety and the wondering and the questioning of how this would all turn out. And that has been, I guess, a reminder for me of the tool of creativity and how that can be really useful when you're in a state of discomfort or uncertainty.
I like that. The tool of creativity getting you through, because it's an unprecedented moment, right? Like, I don't think we've ever lived through a pandemic civil rights movement in an election year ever before. Yeah, and the tool of creativity that was able to channel some anxiety or speak to the moment for you in the work that you created?
It was. Well, the first thing that happened, I mean, just to speak very briefly about a specific project, I have always been kind of very fond of a particular song cycle. And I used to use these songs that were songs written by Mark Campbell and 18 different composers. It's a song cycle called Songs from an Unmade Bed that was produced at the New York Theater Workshop in 2005. And I became very fond of these songs, and over the years, I always used them to vocalize. And one of the positive things about the quarantine time that started in March was that I was able to sing every day in a very regular way that I had never done my whole life. I always was told, you got to sing every day. You won't be a good singer unless you can sing every day. And every day in the shower, I started, well, I can sing. The one thing I can do during this time is I can start working on singing every day and feeling the regular everydayness of that, which I didn't do. I never prioritized it. There was always something else to do. I'm always multitasking. I'm always running all over the place. And this time I started singing, and I always sing with these songs because they're very challenging and I love them very much. And as I sang them, I realized they resonated really, really strongly for me. It was a piece that was written in 2005. The character of the person singing the songs is a gay man in New York City who is longing to connect with other people, who is dealing with the aftermath of the AIDS virus and all of the grief and all of the stuff that comes with that. And there was a real parallel from the history of that piece to the moment that I was in the shower singing the songs. And I approached Mark Campbell, who's the lyricist and the main creative energy behind that piece. And I said, I always wanted to make a movie of this piece. And I approached him before about it. But here we were in March, and I said, I think it's time to make that movie, like right now, as a fundraiser for the Actors Fund or for Broadway Cares or something like that. And he was well on board with the idea. I started to thinking, gosh, if I just could get somebody to film it, I would be great. And I realized that I had 2 years ago married a videographer. You know, you don't connect with these things sometimes. And I was like, wow, honey, look at these songs. And I played these songs for my husband, and he loved them. And so this began a collaboration that we had never experienced before, working together. We had always thought, oh, we could work together at some point, but what would we actually work on? We kind of intersected because we have very different sensibilities. I come from a very musical theater sensibility, and that's not his sensibility at all. His is more music videos and pop music and contemporary dance and stuff. And we came from very different places, and we kind of met in the middle on this particular project. We made 18 music videos in our house over the course of time between, I'd say, the end of April and August. It was live streamed for Broadway Cares, August 11th, I think. And it raised $111,000 for Broadway Cares COVID emergency fund, which was the whole goal. But also, really, to be quite selfish, the creativity was rampant in our house. We would wake up every day and say, what are we going to do today? And we had a purpose, and we had this vibrant sense of creativity that kind of went back and forth between us. It was really great for our relationship, the collaboration, which can be, as you can imagine, challenging between collaborators when it's your person, your mate, your spouse. That becomes colored by other issues. You don't usually prioritize your passion for a particular creative pursuit with your mate. That's something that came about that you have to make a decision. Okay, well, what's more important to me in this moment? Fighting for this creative idea or his feelings or his own creativity. And you learn a lot about your relationship, in our case, luckily in very positive ways. And we emerged with this time capsule little film of what we had done together and a greater sense of being closer to one another. It's a little corny sounding, but it was really great. And that was the whole time up until the first weekend in August. And I was surprised at it because I think in normal terms, you look at your life in this pandemic kind of situation and you think, well, it's all going to be compromised. And in this case, we felt rather alive and had a great time doing it. So that was most of the time period between the beginning of the pandemic and now.
How wonderful to be able to create, especially with the person that you're literally on top of in a New York City apartment, to be able to do that. That would not happen in my house. No. No way. It's a lot of time to spend with each other. And when you're...
Yes, that's right.
When I think as artists, when you're not creating, you get stifled, but how wonderful. And we'll put up on the website the Unmade Bed, the stuff that
Sounds
you
familiar.
created. And so people can, when they listen to, they can watch it and see it.
Yes, okay, great.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love that you are of service to organizations like the Actors Fund and all of that. And I actually want to talk more about your activism a little bit later. But as you were speaking and you were talking about your beginnings being musical theater and all of that, it got me thinking about what was the start for you with this career. I'm always interested to know, what was the bug? When did you get bit by the acting bug and kind of went, oh, I want to do this and get involved with this career?
It's very specific for me. I sang in this elementary school chorus, not a very sophisticated chorus, basically kind of unison and two-part singing chorus, little kids, with a very enthusiastic music teacher, Miss Clazy. And Miss Clazy drafted me to learn to play the violin. You know, when you got to fourth grade, you got to start playing instruments. And I played the violin from fourth grade to 11th grade. And I became very good at playing the violin. There was a lot of energy surrounding my playing the violin because I could do it well. And I was given private lessons. My parents were on board with it and everything. And I had this music teacher who kind of guided me through it. And then I went to high school. And when I was in high school, I hadn't really played the violin for a year or two, I guess. And a teacher came into the class and said, hey, we're drafting musicians for the school orchestra, for the school musical. And I had a friend, her name was Sherry Samuel. Sherry Samuel was this very theatrical young girl whose parents were in community theater, and she knew all about community theater. And she was always talking about these rehearsals that she was having and stuff like that. And I said to her, hey, that sounds really actually cool. I'm going to try out for the orchestra to play for the school musical. And she was adamant. She said, absolutely not. She said, the action is not in the orchestra pit. The action is on the stage. And I secretly wanted somebody to make me do it. It was a far-fetched enough concept for me to be on stage performing at that time. I have a young son who's 20 now, but I see him not having a frame of reference for things. I always have over through, as a parent, you see that your kid doesn't have a frame of reference, has never experienced anything and can't make choices or doesn't make choices because there aren't choices to make. And at that time, that wasn't a choice for me. It was like, well, that's a vague concept that titillates me and really excites me, but I can't picture myself doing it really, unless someone makes me do it. And she had this strong, very aggressive, strong, wonderfully infectious energy. And she got me to go to this, it wasn't hard because I wanted somebody to make me do it. And we went together to the tryouts for this thing. And the first thing that happened was I was an underclassman, and the teacher immediately recognized my enthusiasm because I was kind of fearless and I could do things. Like, I was a boy who wasn't afraid to dance for some reason. I didn't mind moving my body to the music and learning counts. And I was right there in the front row of the dance class or whatever it was, rehearsal. And the teacher immediately recognized my enthusiasm and said, I can't give you a role because the upperclassmen are going to get the roles. In fact, she chose musicals to precast them, basically. And so she said, these roles are cast, but if you come to rehearsal, I'll give you a part here or there, I haven't cast all the parts, all the little parts. And I came like a puppy. I just sat near her in the rehearsal all the time to watch. And she gave me part after part after part. Actually, whenever there was someone that needed a part, she gave it to me. And I had strung together, this was Guys and Dolls was the musical. I strung together this kind of great track, as you would call it on Broadway now, and began a relationship with her, which was very intense and very wonderful and life-changing for me. She became a real mentor. She encouraged me to do things way beyond my comprehension of myself, because at that time she considered me a kind of well-rounded kind of creative person. She always made me design the poster for the show. She made me design the sets. She made me choreograph the shows. And she put me in the shows and coached me and mentored me as an actor. And I walked away from that experience with a very strong sense of myself, confidence, and a sense of what I wanted to do that I'm still drawing from now, that I think I'm drawing from in the shower when I'm deciding what I want to do with my pandemic time. Not feeling limited by my own background or past experiences. I had never made a movie in my house before. It was possible to me because someone way, way back when I was a kid unlocked a door that demystified the process of doing any task. Yes, of course you can do that. I mean, you should at least try it. That was a thing that not everybody really got to practice, that mechanism of trying it, sometimes failing and sometimes succeeding. And that is a crucial relationship in my development as a young person that led to her talking to my parents about it, how serious she thought I should be about it, kind of handing me over to the department at a college when I went to college, all of it. And it led to my fascination for teaching and mentoring and for having that relationship with younger people.
And we all need those mentors and those teachers that come into our lives. And I don't know, I can't speak for John, but for myself, I had that. I'm sure John did too.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
I would love to speed it up just a little bit. The time goes so quickly. I say that all the time. There's at least a moment in my life where a family took me to the theater. We went to go see, you know what I'm going to say, M. Butterfly. Okay. That's what I was going to say. I've done a lot of research on you over the past week and read every interview and listened to other podcasts that you listen to. There's this incredible story about you getting to the audition of M. Butterfly. Can you tell a little bit about the M. Butterfly experience and getting shot out of a cannon, winning every major award? And then I would love to talk about that a little bit.
And the rest was all downhill from that point.
Well, we'll talk about that too.
I was a young actor. I was living in LA at the time. I came to New York to work in musicals. I really did. And I came very young. I dropped out of college. I had to just kind of fill the gap. I had a bad experience in college and I left the program that I was in and I came to New York. I saved some money and I came to New York to just learn on the street, as it were, how to be an actor. I eventually got the West Coast company of a Broadway show. La Cage aux Folles was the show. And I was an understudy in that show, and I was one of the singers in the chorus. We went to San Francisco, which is actually my hometown, and the second stop was LA. And so I stayed in LA after the show closed. That's when I started studying acting more seriously, and I had an acting teacher, and I had an agent there eventually. And the agent asked me if I wanted to read for a play in New York. This is after me trying to slug it out as an actor, trying to break into small parts in television and film. And I was kind of just getting there. I was getting little parts in television and film. And I said, no, I don't want to go back to New York to read for a play. But I was originally a person who wanted to be a Broadway actor. And so I said, well, what is this play? And I was fascinated. I had simultaneously been working with this wonderful acting teacher, Don Houghton, a very small class, like a handful of students in this class in this basement, less than 99-seat theater in Hollywood. But the class was a good class for me, and he was a good teacher, and his main philosophy was this actor's studio kind of commitment to being a messenger idea. And I was wonderfully into that, but I didn't totally get it. I didn't understand what that really meant. Like, well, okay, I understand that you're an actor for things outside of yourself. In other words, you're not just acting for your own ego after a certain point, which is an entry point for a lot of actors, to be seeking gratification or validation. That's what draws a lot of actors to it. But after a certain point, when you've learned how to do it, the real meat of being an actor is being a messenger to someone else's ideas or a director's ideas or something outside of yourself. And Don Houghton, this teacher, was teaching me that, and I was a little bit not sure about it. And so then I asked this agent, please send me this script. He was a small town agent who didn't really have a clue about what this play might have been. And it was the first play that I ever read that had an Asian person's name on the title page as the author. And as a result, every page I turned was filled with this kind of validation of things that I didn't even know I felt. I was always entering the field knowing there were great challenges for me as a person of color, and that I didn't know what to do about them. I was wrestling with them throughout the time from after high school, because I was completely in this wonderful colorblind world in my high school. And then I went out into the real world and realized that I had been spoiled. And I had these ideas about what being an actor could be and fantasies about it. And this play was the first play I had ever read where my feelings as an Asian American man and as an actor and as a performer all kind of were on the page because the writers shared those ideas that I had and validated me by writing this play. So I immediately felt I had to do the play, felt I had to audition for the play at the very least. And I borrowed money from my folks. You know, at that time it was like $99 to get on this terrible airline to go to New York to audition for a play I warned them I would never, ever get because I was realistic and rightly so about the odds of such a thing. I said, the play will probably change somebody's life. I felt that strong about it, but I know it won't be me, but that should not be on the table that I will get this part if you're going to lend me this money, you know. And they got it and they sent me and I got the part eventually after a long, long period of going back and forth and going from LA to New York a couple of times. And it was a really multi-faceted experience. It was very positive on many levels. It was very challenging on many levels. And it was very difficult or unpleasant on many levels, you know, like life. And it was very complex in that way. And I regard it with great complexity when I think about it. But it was ultimately very positive for me as a creative person. And in my career, it opened doors for me or created a situation for me that has lasted, that has been a foundation for who I am. I've struggled with where it dumped me into the industry. I struggled a little bit with it because I think I was thought of for a while as a kind of a rather odd performer. But it has come around tremendously from that point in a way that I think it's part of a context of my identity in some ways as a creative person.
I mean, you won every single award possible to win for that. And you talk about it being life-changing. I'm kind of curious, you're this young actor, you get this thing, and then all of a sudden there are all of these accolades. What did that do to your head? Did you believe your PR at the time? How did you handle all of a sudden being in this situation where like all eyes and all accolades are on you now?
I was very cerebral about this thing that you're talking about. I thought about it a lot. First of all, I had a good friend named Ray, who was like a young actor friend of mine that was my one kind of friend that I would tell about my auditions and stuff like that. And it's like, I have this audition for this crazy play. You're just not going to believe it. The part is so incredible. And I made the mistake of saying, oh, well, this play is going to change this person's life. Whoever gets this part is going to win the Tony Award. There's no question about it. If they do half of what they're supposed to do. I made the mistake of those words actually coming out of my mouth and then getting the part and going, oh no, why did I say that? Why did I ever say that? And wanting to commit to this idea that it wouldn't change me or that I would remain rock-like in my sense of who I was or what I was trying to get out of something and what would be a valuable experience. And it didn't include wealth or all of the kind of obvious things. I think my dad and my mom, my dad in particular, were really good about being my dad was very corny in a good way, philosophical, kind of fortune cookie wisdom kind of guy. And he was always about, the simplest things, the most important things are your relationships with your family and what you love to do and what's important to you. And I was always able to kind of hang on to that to the point where I kind of shut out a lot of things and in some ways didn't enjoy the experience because I shut out those things. I remember not wanting to know. I don't want anybody to tell me about things like the review, the critics. I don't want to know about the nominations or anything like that. And I remember feeling people around me kind of whispering and things like that. And I said, I don't want to hear about all of that stuff. That's not important to me. And I don't know if it was important to me or not, but I sure committed to trying to concentrate on the work, really. And that paid off for me as a young person. I think I was really very consistent with myself about it. And so my older brother, Brian, who was not able to come to opening night of And Butterfly with me, was my date to the Tony Awards. And he was my date to be a kind of leveler, because he's also a very cerebral kind of guy and all of that stuff. And that was a part of the experience of going to the Tony Awards. To put it in a nutshell, it was to try to be level and try to not get all bent out of shape about it. And it's totally fine if we don't win. It's not going to be a big deal. Let's going to have a good time. And it's like such a wonderful experience to have. And it became a little exhausting. You're constantly reminding yourself of these things. But it was worth it. I think it was the right thing to do. And it really helped me to maintain a certain kind of perspective.
And you did win.
And then I did win. And yeah, I don't know what to say about that. To be quite honest, I'm very quick to say I'm very critical of most of the people that win these things. So I think, oh, they'll just give one of these things to anybody, won't they? And, every year I go, really? That person? So I try to keep that in context with my own having been given one.
I'll never forget that performance as long as I live. It was
wow. Okay.
It was something new that, at least for myself, a white boy from Long Island, had never seen such magnificence on stage, such poise and grace and humor, which gets me to my next question. There's so many things that I would love to talk about, and we are an off-Broadway podcast. I remember seeing you next in The Tempest. You played Ariel. I would love to talk a little bit more about your activism and your voice as an artist. And I remember reading yesterday, you were a person to kind of stand up when that whole Miss Saigon thing happened years ago to say, hey, wait a minute. And I'm so interested, BD, and John and I were talking yesterday about what's going on in the country now, Black Lives Matter, and what's going on in the theater, and everything is kind of upside down. And you've had a voice as an artist for so long, and I'd love to get your point of view about theater and racism and really what's going on.
Well, my initial response to this is that I'm not one of those people that bemoans the pain and suffering. I mean, of course I bemoan the pain and suffering of human beings. Of course I do. But I always look forward to the thing that is going to come from it that is positive and life-changing and changes something. There's no way that something huge like the murder of George Floyd cannot lead to something positive, because human beings don't allow that. It's just not possible. And that probably comes from being in the theater, where almost 100% of all work that's generated is coming from somebody taking some experience in their life and turning it into something beautiful, or hopefully beautiful. That's just what the theater kind of is. I mean, you don't set out to make something ugly. You might create a play or a moment or a scene in which you are questioning the motives of human beings and what they're all about, or what they're capable of, or how dark they can become. You may do that. But ultimately, as a creative person, you're not looking to turn the clock backward. You're looking to use the human condition and use emotion and the everydayness of life to tell us something, to remind us of something, or to illuminate or uncover something. And so you could feel in the air, first of all, years and years of pre-George Floyd murder, everything that preceded George Floyd's murder. There's a kind of demarcation to me of the timing of that murder with the way that everyone was feeling at the time, with the pandemic, with the being kept up inside, with a sense of hopelessness, with whatever it was that drove the protests to be activated. You could feel a moment coming. You just never were sure when it was going to happen. And there it was happening. And as a result, I wasn't even ready, even though I say that I'm always looking for this kind of change. I was not ready for the wonderful conversations that have developed as a result, that are related specifically to the theater and what the theater is about. Because theater in general has been dancing and avoiding the issue of the representation of people of color and women for decades. And we came very close recently with a lot of artistic directors kind of going to the mat for female playwrights and female playwrights of color and saying, look, I see that my season has none of this. And I realize I'm part of the problem because it doesn't. And so therefore I'm going to make a change. Now you saw that happening. Then there was a kind of a plateauing of that energy. It did create a change. But now you have an actual demand from people of color and writers and saying, no, you know what, it's not good enough, actually, because this is actually a part of the problem. We were supposed to be reflecting, our job as theater artists is to reflect humanity in all of its manifestations, in all its diversity. And we're incapable of doing so without people of color simply on the staffs of these theaters to start with. So a seismic paradigm shift needs to kind of happen, a real one where artistic directors are called to the carpet and are forced to commit to some kind of change, which I feel is starting to happen, or has happened in big ways in small places, in different ways, not across the board necessarily. But you can feel that you're kind of not with it if you're not part of this conversation and you're in the theater. And I think that's super exciting. I'm really into that. I'm really into how, remembering way back in the Saigon days, how incredibly difficult it was to get someone to understand something as simple as what the concept of blackface and yellowface were. As an Asian person, when you equate a yellowface to blackface, there was a little light bulb that went off in people's minds. Oh, you mean like that terrible stuff in the movies where white actors painted them blacked up? We call it in London, they call it blacking up. And yes, that's exactly what it is. And that light bulb going off is a light bulb that doesn't need to go off as quite as obviously now. People kind of get it, and people kind of understand appropriation a little bit more. They understand whitewashing a little bit more. Everything incrementally, the needle has definitely inched into the area that we want it to a little bit more. And that's encouraging to me and really exciting. And it's exciting to see young people taking on the conversation and really running with it. And for people, not just in the theater, but in the aftermath of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and all of these, heroic people who don't even themselves know the impact that they've had by giving their lives or by having their lives taken. And the theater is just one part of a kind of shift that when you feel it happening, it's rather exciting to me. I'm just really into it. I love seeing humans kind of figuring out something and then doing the right thing, as it were.
I wanted to ask a question about the cost of these things as a creative person, right? Mm-hmm. Speaking up during that time, what did it cost you? You know what I mean? People talk about bravery and doing courageous things, but they always do come at a little bit of a cost. You kind of lose some things and you gain some things. And I'm kind of interested, as a person with a career, was there a cost to speaking truth to power at that time? Because that was a brave thing to do then.
I don't know how brave or not brave it was. I just knew that I felt like not saying something just feels totally wrong. I mean, that would be really upsetting to me to kind of just let this one slide, as it were, because it was very big. The show was such a kind of phenom. It was such a huge success in London. And you just wanted to start a discussion. And the cost of it at the time was, it was really sad. It was sad because I was singled out because I was an actor as a person who had ulterior motives. And all of a sudden I was like, he's the only reason he's doing this is because he wants that part.
Right.
And that blows my mind on many different levels. I wanted to say at the time, what if I do? Now I would say, you're damn right I want that part. Why shouldn't I want that part? At the time, I could not say that. It was too shameful. You were too shamed for it. It was like ulterior motives. Like somebody would bring up decades of exclusion and yellowface and appropriation so that they could get a part. That's a little twisted. But what was the real cost of it for me was a sense of, I became very disillusioned by people in general. We dragged the mayor into it. It was Mayor Jenkins at the time. And Mayor Jenkins was theoretically into the discussion that we were having about people of color in the arts. But then when it came down to it and Cameron McIntosh threatened to not bring the show in, Jenkins totally caved.
Yeah.
And then there were people like Mayor Koch, who was no longer the mayor, going on record in the paper to say, what does BD Wong think? People were all weighing in all of a sudden, people that had no business doing it or expertise or understanding of the nuances of this history that we're talking about. And there are countless examples that people would call me on the phone. This is when people somehow would call you on the phone, and your phone would ring and challenge you about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And people were mad at me because the show was such a success and people were so excited about it creatively. Even Asian American people who were really counting on the show to come so that they could be in it in smaller roles were mad at me. There was quite an enthusiastic group of people that were into this, and rightly so. So enough water has flowed under the bridge, or whatever you call it, to give me perspective about it. Casting directors immediately understood and created a discussion that started immediately at the time. And this started, of course, with people in the ensembles of Broadway shows. In other words, you started to see a difference in the casting of ensembles. They were no longer completely 100% white. They started to use people of color in shows that were, up until that point before that, thought of as historically accurate, like Les Mis and Phantom. Before this, Les Mis and Phantom were shows that you would never put people of color in. I mean, it's wonderful that these shows have lasted, and that Phantom, until very recently, was still running, and that you started to see people of color. In the beginning, it was a novelty to have, I think Robert Guillaume was the first Black Phantom. And that was an absolute novelty. It's like, look, everyone, at this novelty, this novel idea. Because he's in a mask, we can justify it. But a more sense of colorblind ensemble casting in particular came about after this discussion. You could feel it. And I felt gratified by that. It wasn't really enough, but I felt gratified by that. Now we're at a place where an actor of color can get an audition for a part that's not written specifically for their own ethnicity. You feel a little bit of a shift in that. You certainly can refer to history to back up your arguments if you are trying to encourage a casting director to open the field for a particular role.
Really well put. I'm going to swing it to John. We were talking yesterday about, I was reading an article about you saying that casting directors and agents would tell you Asian people aren't funny.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I was blown away that somebody would just say that to your face.
When we were talking about it yesterday, I said to him, oh, there have been many times, especially when I was first in the city, where a casting director would go, can you be blacker, more gangster, right? So there were these expectations and these like tropes of your ethnicity that you needed to play into, or that was expected and wanted by the people making the art, right?
Embraced even.
Embraced, yeah.
They have no problem saying, can you be blacker to a Black person? They actually, the words came out of their mouths so easily. So easily. Like it was just part of their job. And it's fascinating to me. What caused that?
There's such a shift. I don't think that could happen at all today, especially in this moment. And people would say things like, oh, the pearls are falling out of your mouth. I mean, these were things that casting directors would say.
Oh, yeah.
Well, that one I've heard.
I guess the question for me is about, how did you swallow and absorb all of those aggressions or microaggressions during that time and still be able to continue on? How were you able to absorb all of that? Like, this isn't really cool, but I got to put one foot in front of the other.
We want the work. Right?
Yeah. I unfortunately turned it onto myself. I wanted to be different. I said, well, geez, I really just wanted for a very specific period of time in my life when I was a young actor, I wanted to be a white person. I don't know if I'm ashamed to say so. I mean, it's just a rather odd thing to think about wanting at this stage in my life. But at the time I thought, well, if you could give me $100,000 and give me an operation to become Matthew Broderick, that was my choice. I would have done it in a second. And it's just to illustrate really that what I would have said is, oh, of course, yes, of course. It was a very sycophantic kind of life as a young actor. Like, I'll do whatever you want. I mean, of course, I'll do it. That whole I can be this kind of thing when you're an actor. Oh, I could be taller. I could be this. I could be. And so I never questioned the system, as it were, as I do now. I would never say at that time, oh, you shouldn't say that. You shouldn't say that to me. That's not appropriate. I was not of a generation of kids who would call people out for inappropriate behavior or things like that. Coming back to the whole concept of a frame of reference, I didn't have a frame of reference for how inappropriate certain requests are. Nowadays, there are actors who might have enough moxie to say, you're not supposed to ask me that.
Oh, they would. Absolutely.
Yeah. And my upbringing, I never did anything like that. I would get out of the room and maybe call my agent and see if that's something could happen that way at the very most. My answer to your question is I put it on myself a little bit more than I would like to say that I did. I tried to do the best that I could, learning all the accents. And I tried to be dignified and authentic about that because I thought that was the way to win the accent game. Because with Asian American actors, that's the equivalent of the gangster thing, which is like, could you please do it with an accent? Could you please do it with an accent? And I was willful and arrogant enough to always know that they wanted the accent and to not do it until they made me do it. I would just go in with the regular Brooklyn, Southern, any American kind of accent that I felt like was right for the part. And I was playing a Chinese waiter in a Chinese restaurant, right? Like you might find if I got a job as a waiter in a Chinese restaurant. There's actual precedence for it. But then they would say, and then they would do that thing where they try to get you to do the accent. And then I would do it. But mostly I would kind of, I don't know, it's exhausting.
Absolutely. I mean, I kind of like a follow-up to that. Was there a moment in your life and career where you went, no more, this is my line in the sand. This is my moment to go. I'm going to accept my BD-ness as my BD-ness. And if you don't like it, nuts to you. Was there a moment or a time in your career where you went, this is not acceptable to me?
I don't think there was a moment. I don't think there was one dramatic or delineated or noticeable moment. I think there is a time period, for example, the time period and the conversation I had with myself where I took everything that was chorus off my resume. And it was scary because I was a chorus boy. And I thought, wow, this is more than half my resume. There's no leading parts on here. They're all high school, my leading parts. What do I do? And I said, no, you've got to do it. You want to level up. You have to kind of do it. And then maybe it feels a little bit like starting over. They don't know about all of that chorus that was on your resume yesterday. They don't see it anymore. So they see you this way now. Oh, I see how that works. Okay, I will do that. And I think there's a similar parallel in this conversation that we're having about presenting yourself and presenting who it is that you are. One thing that I will say is that I had a strong sense of my own identity and what worked for me. It never worked for me to send up a character with an Asian accent. In other words, to do the accent in a way that was really what many people would consider offensive. It was to push into the dialect and to make fun of the way that the Asian people that have English as their second language, how they process language, to make fun of it, to like make fun of certain words. For example, the obvious thing is to reverse the R's and the L's in a Chinese dialect. I never did that. I couldn't do that. I wasn't able or capable or talented enough to do that. I just couldn't get myself to do it. And so I was always trying to find an authentic accent that was funny because the person was funny. What a concept, right? But that was the only way that felt right to me. And I tried to think, well, I know they want it funny. I know you want it funny, but I can't do it that funny the way that you. And sometimes I would convince myself, and I was right, that they themselves don't even know what it is. If it's funny and you're able to circumvent this issue of the accent, then hey, that's great. They don't always know necessarily what you're doing or how you're doing it. They just know you're funny. And then they're happy that you're funny and that you're not so resistant that you would refuse to be funny. And so to answer your question, there wasn't a moment where I decided I'm not doing this anymore. I did walk into it with a certain amount of resistance already. I was aware by being a consumer, a person who watched TV and films, aware of what it was they were going to be asking me to do. I mean, I was aware enough to go, well, you probably had your own kind of gangsta kind of version of this. Like, well, I see that these parts are all going to be ... And I'm naive enough or idealistic enough to think, well, but maybe I'll be there at the right place in the right time to kind of reinvent something or to re-explore something, and someone will let me do that. So there wasn't a delineated moment where I refused to do it, but I did enter it thinking that I was already resistant to it. What I wasn't good at, and what I didn't do was I wasn't confrontational. I always try to do it through the work. I always try to kind of, well, let me just do it this way and the work will speak for itself. And then I can be confrontational that way. I can be resistant that way, but I'm not going to say, excuse me, that's not right. I won't do that. I was never that person.
Yeah. You would be labeled as difficult. I mean, it was just a different time. I think it's so interesting now, the shift, because I do see younger actors taking more agency, and it's really kind of thrilling and exciting.
Because it represents change in the world that we're talking about. This is the thing that we're talking about with the conversation with artists of color and regional theaters. Unless they make demands, the change is not as easily come or won. And so that sensibility of actually not caring at all about how it comes across. That's what Me Too is all about. You have to say, absolutely not. I will not do that in order to change the course of the situation. And I guess that is one of the things to learn. That's what Me Too is about. Is like for years and years, women would try to figure out how to negotiate it. And you see that painful negotiation in the dramatic portrayals of these types of situations. And you go, oh gosh, to be a woman and to have to do that negotiation, or to feel like you have to do that negotiation, as opposed to the way that you'll be labeled if you refuse accepting that. That's fascinating. And for young women to have no concept of the former way is really exciting and really, really great. It really shows you something. There are side effects, I'm sure, to it. There are side effects to it, I'm sure. Is that person, does that change their personality in other ways? Or who knows?
I think what's exciting about it is that, now there are people of color on the other side of the table,
That's right?
Like, so it's now not white people writing their perception of people of color. They're actually people of color who can go, no, this isn't culturally right, or this isn't how it would happen. And so it really is exciting. I want to pivot. I'm interested, and I'm sure some of the students would be interested. You're an actor who works in all mediums, right? So theater, film, television. And I'm just curious, how do they inform each other for you, right? So is there like a way of working in film and television that you find benefits theater or vice versa? It is one craft. We just practice it in different mediums. And sometimes I feel like we mystify one over the other, but actually it's one craft. So I'm curious how they feed and inform one another for you.
Yes. And I'm constantly, even to this day, in my old age, kind of really still exploring this and enjoying the exploration of it. Most recently, I had a really great experience during this television show, Mr. Robot, which was a cable show that I was on for 4 seasons. It just recently had its season finale and ended with a bang. And that work was really satisfying to me. But I started to notice during the course of that show, the different way that I felt when I walked onto the set of the television show or in a movie, and the way that I felt walking into the first public performance of a show. And the difference is that when I walk into the first public performance of a show, I may not have all the quick changes and the geography backstage all figured out because I just walked into the theater a few days ago. But I will have rehearsed that part for 4 weeks, and I know the part. And I know what I want to do with it. And I know it's going to evolve and choices are going to be made and change and all that stuff. But that rehearsal goes deep into your body, hopefully, if it's a healthy rehearsal process. And there's no equivalent in television and film. The process is so truncated in television and film. Now, there are fancy movies that have big rehearsals and stuff. Like I can't imagine like Meryl Streep doesn't rehearse. But I have done very few films where there's actually a rehearsal process or period that's outside of the set. And so therefore you're walking onto the set to stage the thing, to do the table work that you do in the theater, to do a lot of things the first day that you're shooting it. A movie that I did that I love very much called Focus with Will Smith was the first film that I walked onto where they said, we're going to take a week to shoot this one scene. It was a long scene, but we were going to take a week to do it. And so we just work our way through the scene, and that includes a fair amount of rehearsal. And I felt in that work that I got the performance to a place where I was fully fluid with it in a way that I would if I was on stage. And that was a lesson to me because I think I didn't even know the difference. You just wing it. You're just going for it. And that's part of the fun of it, is that a lot of those actors will say, oh my God, 4 weeks, that's too much. That's going to get stale. I can't work like that. There's an actual backlash against it in some ways. For me, installing something deep into my performance mechanism is sublime. I think it is just powerful feeling. It feels beautiful. It feels the best way to commit yourself to that idea that you're the messenger and to align yourself with the ideas and all of that stuff. And it gives you confidence and allows you to lean on the parts that you're going to lean on with great confidence. Now, spontaneity needs to come to that, and you need to add that to it or find it. But what happened in the 4th season of Mr. Robot, which was amazing to me, was that we had what we call the marathon table reading of the whole season. In 2 days, we read the entire season of scripts in 2 days, one after the other. And this was in January, and the show is shot in the summer. And I was given, among many other gifts with this part that this wonderful writer, Sam Esmail, wrote, I was given the gift of this huge scene right before my exit. My character exited the show. And in one of those parts of it was a gigantic monologue, maybe a 15-page scene and a 5-page monologue, something like that. A really huge, seminal kind of monologue. And for the first time in my whole life, my whole work career life, I thought, oh, I'm going to rehearse this like a play. Normally you would kind of memorize it and you kind of go over it a bunch of times and you walk onto the set and you know it. All you really need to do is know the words. And then a lot of stuff just falls into place. I said, well, what if I memorize it now, January, February? I said, send me the latest draft as soon as you're done with it, because he was going to rewrite it after that January reading. And he sent it to me in February. And in February, I memorized it right away. And then I did it every night before I went to bed, like I was in rehearsal. And I just experimented with different ways of doing it. I gave myself a rehearsal process, a proper one. When I walked onto the set in July, it was like I had been in the part for a long run of a show. It never occurred to me to do this before. You never get the opportunity to do it. You often have rewrites. There's any number of reasons why you can't do it. And here was the thing that was most important to me. I thought, I really want to get this right. I really want to do this really right. And the part ended up getting a little bit edited, but the meat of the speech and the meat of that part are still there in that scene. And there's a huge difference in my work when I look at it. I mean, I can tell the difference when I'm watching. I can't describe to you why it feels better, but it's just better. It's just so much incredibly better. So I will always try to do that now whenever I can, to really commit to kind of giving myself a much more detailed process, if it's not in the theater.
That character, and I know exactly, I was obsessed with the show. As soon as I started to understand it within the first, because it's not my world, but I have so many questions about White Rose, but unfortunately we have to start to wrap up. I mean, we can talk for another 2 or 3 hours, but
yes,
I mean, you are an actor, as John Andrew said, that goes between Broadway and off Broadway, and you work regionally around the country so much. You always seem to go where the good work is, or you create your own work. I mean, you have that one-man show, which I would love to have seen. What is your hope with this hopeful change that is happening in our country? What is your hope for the theater and for off-Broadway and for the work for everybody?
My first instinct, I always like to try to go with the first thing that pops into my head. And the first thing that pops into my head is this rather sad video that Dame Judi Dench made about the theater and about how she said, I just don't see it coming back. And for someone of her stature to say that and publish it, and I'm watching it and thinking, nobody has ever said this out loud. It just blows my mind. That would be such a humane loss of such gargantuan proportions. We are right now struggling with jerry-rigging the virtual format and with trying to figure out how to do play readings. It's very quaint of us. It's very cute that we're trying to stuff the history of the theater way back from the ancient Greeks, all of that, stuff it into a Zoom. And yet we are human beings, and we will try and we will innovate and we will do wonderful things. And that is true. What it makes you realize is that the profundity of human contact and human interaction that occurs in the theater cannot be taken lightly. We don't just miss it kind of in passing. It's a flaw in our everyday life that it is no longer on our plate. It's a huge gaping hole in our lives. And I think even I would argue that people that don't love the theater don't really understand the ramifications of it. And that's a whole long discussion. I found myself responding to Dame Judy's remarks by saying, I'm not so quick to believe that. I mean, I'm a hopeful kind of person. I think she's actually a hopeful type of person too. And she was having a moment or whatever, and she says it's completely valid. But it's a virus, and human beings are now, as we speak, doing their thing to try to make sure that we can do the things that we did before. And I have no reason to think that we won't. What I do think is that when we come back, there will be a really enhanced sense of appreciation and of not wasting our time and our piddling around with things that don't mean something. And that because of Black Lives Matter and because of Me Too and because of a lot of things that have happened in the last recent memory, we will have richer content, it's possible. And that we'll be open to more. I'm interested in how this will affect the whole issue of the commerciality of theater, because that was getting really, It was becoming an industry that was less and less interesting to me, and is maybe because I'm interested in people's voices and hearing stories and being illuminated by difference and diversity. That's the activation. It's not just like, oh, we need more opportunities as people of color. It's the fact that the equation doesn't work if we're not all sharing our unique experiences.
Right.
That's fundamental to the argument in favor of diversity. It must go way beyond whether or not we're working or whether we're employed. It has to become about, I can't be in my full self as a human being unless I know everything that's out there. And I want to hear, what is your story? What does that have or not have to do with me? Both of those things are extremely valuable, whether it has something to do with me or whether it doesn't have something to do with me. And they're both possible, and they also can both coexist. Where does it live? It lives in a great play. It lives in hopefully a great musical, which can explore these kinds of things. And that mechanism is alive. That discussion, that's what the legacy of George Floyd and all of George Floyd's brothers and sisters who represent that George Floyd experience, too numerous to name, what they are partly for. They're for this discussion that's coming about, which has to do with what my voice is saying and the absolute human need to be heard. In this case, often to demand to be heard. And that demand is really a new thing in some ways. There's a new color of it that's really quite exciting. And so my hope, and this is a long answer, I'm sorry, but my hope is that, we get back into the theater and all of a sudden these active voices are really more acceptable and more accepted than they were before, because we've all exercised those muscles in quarantine because we're all screaming at each other. We're screaming and we're used to it. And it's like, wow, okay, well, some of this shit would be really great on stage, wouldn't it? We're going to get some of these conversations on the stage, because that's when drama is really, really life affirming and it reminds you of what it means to be a human being. So I look forward to that. I have no idea what the time frame is. I don't agree necessarily with Dame Judy that I don't think we can get the theater back. I think we can. And I think when we do, maybe all of these conversations are like a dress rehearsal for some great new sensibility. It's a little idealistic because the commercial theater will always appeal to masses of people and sustain it and subsidize it in some ways. And that
but I agree with you. I think we can kind of make a commercial theater can also have all of those things that you're talking about. And I think,
wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. And I think some of the country can be ready for that too.
That's what I'm hoping. What's interesting to me is right before the pandemic, the kind of golden child of the commercial theater crossing over to the people was Hamilton. That's the thing. We talk about Hamilton and its sublime impact on young people, on the connection of popular music and popular culture to something that's staid and old and traditional. And then right before the pandemic, there are elements now of even questioning Hamilton and even bringing up the issues of Hamilton. Wow, that wouldn't have happened, I don't think. And I think that's amazing. Like, I love Lin-Manuel, I love Hamilton, I love everything that it represents. But to question it and to kind of break it open and to really ask questions about it is super valuable. If we can do that about something so popular and so commercial, what can we do for everything else? That would be just so great.
Yeah, completely agree. BD Wong, this hour and some has been, for me, really eye-opening. Your explanations of things are so clear and valid. I'm so honored that you agreed to do this first show with me. I'm so honored to be by my friend here, John Andrew, and to have you. I adore you. I adore your work.
Thank you.
You're just as kind and sweet and down to earth as you were 28 years ago.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, that's a relief.
I feel very humbled and so proud to have you on our show. So thank you so much.
Thank you, BD. Thank you so much. I could speak with you for hours, and I intend to speak with you for hours.
Yes, let's do it.
Yes. Next week, John Andrew and I will be interviewing Ty Jones, producing artistic director of the Classical Theater of Harlem. We hope you'll listen next Friday, October 9th, to his compelling story. Coming up in October, we'll be airing our interview with transgender actor, writer, and human rights advocate Maybe Burke on October 16th. Daphne Rubin Vega and I will be interviewing actor, recording artist, producer, and theater arts teacher Telly Leong. which will air on October 23rd, and our interview with Tony Award-winning actor Tanya Pinkins will air on October 30th. More information on these guests and how to attend one of our recordings online can be found on our website, liveathelortel.com. This podcast is brought to you by the Lucille Lortel Theater. Live at the Lortel is produced by George Forbes, executive producer yours truly, associate producer Jeffrey Schubart. Press is provided by Sin Gogolak, GoGo Public Relations, and our social media is managed by Mia Radia. Special thanks to Nancy Hurwitz and Alana Canty Samuel. Live at the Lortel is recorded online by Brian Falk, Abacus Entertainment. While theaters are closed, we hope you will consider donating to the COVID-19 Emergency Relief Fund at actorsfund.org or your favorite theater company. Thank you so much for listening.